It was supposed to be a celebration, a simple evening to honor my mother's birthday, the kind of family gathering where neighbors dropped by with store-bought cakes, and my father held court with his endless stories about respectability. The dining room glowed with the soft light of the chandelier, and voices overlapped with polite laughter. I stood near the kitchen doorway carrying a tray of glasses when my sister Sophie's voice cut across the chatter. She called my name sharp like a command. I turned and saw her eyes narrowed, her body taut with some unspoken fury. Before I could respond, she closed the space between us. Her hand shot to my hair, fingers clamping like iron. The sudden yank stole my breath. Pain shot across my scalp as she dragged me forward. The tray clattered. Glasses shattered, conversations froze. My body pitched toward the staircase. The first step slammed against my back. My head jolted forward and I clutched at the railing for balance, but Sophie's grip tightened. She pulled with a violence that felt rehearsed, each tug a message that I had no control, no right even to stand upright. Guests gasped. Someone whispered my name, but no one intervened. The wooden steps bruised my ribs as I stumbled downward. My knees hit the edge of a step and fire shot through the bone. I cried out, the sound raw, filling the silence that had replaced the birthday cheer. Halfway down, I twisted, desperate to grab Sophie's wrist, but she wrenched harder. My hair burned against my scalp and strands tore free. I felt the sting of tears but forced myself not to collapse. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain. This was no private argument. This was a public spectacle orchestrated by my own sister. Her voice hissed close to my ear. "You will never rise above me." The words cut deeper than her grip. I landed on the final step, momentum sending me sprawling to the floor. The room tilted, the edges blurred. A copper taste filled my mouth, and when I touched my lips, my fingers came away red. My mother's face loomed above me, not with concern, but with cold irritation, as though my collapse had embarrassed her in front of the guests. My father cleared his throat and raised his hands, offering the crowd a dismissive smile. "Just sisters playing too rough," he said, his voice steady, rehearsed. "Nothing to see here." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the air thick with tension, but no one challenged his words. They lowered their eyes, shuffled back to their seats, murmuring about the cake or the weather, anything to erase the violence they had just witnessed. I pushed myself upright, my hair tangled, my back throbbing. Sophie stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with triumph. She looked down on me as if I were nothing more than the family's shame dragged into view. I wanted to scream at them all, to demand that they acknowledge what had just happened, but the weight of silence pressed down. My mother's warning glare froze my tongue. My father turned his back, already filling his glass, pretending the world was intact. The humiliation was suffocating. Every guest had seen, every guest had chosen silence, and I had been left to swallow the pain alone. Still, I forced myself to stand straight. My legs trembled, but I would not crouch before them. The room's laughter returned, brittle and forced. My sister descended slowly now, as if nothing had happened, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her dress. She passed me without a word, but her shoulder brushed mine with deliberate force. A chill spread through me, a promise of more to come. In that moment, I understood something that changed everything. This family would never protect me. They would never see me as equal. If I survived, it would be because I learned to stand against them. That realization settled in my chest heavier than the bruises blooming along my back. I touched the tender spot on my scalp where strands of hair were missing and drew in a shaky breath. Around me, the party resumed, plates, clinking, voices rising again, as if the scene on the stairs had never happened. But I carried the truth in my body. My own sister had dragged me down those steps in front of witnesses. My parents had looked away. My community had chosen silence. I turned to the reader now, to anyone willing to listen. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family, forced to endure violence while those around you pretended nothing happened? That night was my breaking point. I knew then that silence would only protect Sophie, not me. I did not yet know how I would fight back, but deep inside, I promised myself that the next time she tried to destroy me, she would not find me defenseless. That is why I am telling this story. to show how a woman who was dragged down the stairs by her own sister found the strength to rise again, and why the silence of others can never erase the truth. If you have ever been shamed by the people meant to protect you, share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know where you are listening from because this fight for dignity is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who has been told to keep quiet when cruelty wears the mask of family. When I was 8 years old, I learned the difference between how Sophie and I would always be treated. At school, I had brought home a drawing of a bird, awkward but colorful. I was proud, hoping my parents would pin it to the refrigerator. Sophie, 3 years older, had brought home a math certificate. My mother clapped her hands and kissed Sophie's cheek, declaring her the pride of the Dawson family. When I timidly held out my drawing, my father glanced at it for less than a second. He muttered that crayons were for children and told me to help set the dinner table. The paper ended up in the trash folded under onion skins. That night, I listened as Sophie bragged about how smart she was while my parents nodded in agreement. Something inside me shrank, and I realized that in this house recognition was not earned by effort, but by favoritism. Years piled onto years, and the pattern never broke. Sophie received new clothes at the start of every semester while I wore her hand-me-downs. If I dared to complain, my mother scolded me for being ungrateful. At family gatherings, relatives would be introduced to Sophie as the shining daughter destined for success. I stood by holding plates or collecting empty glasses my existence barely acknowledged. The contrast was so stark it etched into my bones, teaching me early that love in this house was not unconditional. My father, Richard Dawson, was a man obsessed with appearances. He managed a local insurance office and carried himself like a small-town dignitary. His hair was always slicked back, his tie knotted tightly. He spoke of reputation the way others spoke of faith. He reminded us constantly that people were watching, that one wrong step could bring shame upon the Dawsons. To him, Sophie represented achievement, while I represented potential embarrassment. When Sophie misbehaved, he would laugh it off as youthful fire. When I made a mistake, the punishment was swift, a lecture that dragged for hours about how I endangered the family's standing. My mother, Margaret, played the role of peacekeeper, but in practice she reinforced Sophie's dominance. She excused every cruelty with a weary sigh. If Sophie screamed at me for borrowing a sweater, my mother would scold me for provoking her. If Sophie skipped chores, my mother assigned them to me. Over time, I stopped expecting fairness. Instead, I learned to move quietly through the house, finishing tasks before they could be demanded, swallowing words that would only bring rebuke. Sophie thrived on that imbalance. She grew bold, cruel in ways only someone protected can be. She mocked my weight, my hair, my grades. When I cried, she smirked, knowing tears only made me appear weak in the eyes of our parents. By high school, she had perfected the art of humiliating me in front of others. She whispered lies to classmates claiming I stole money or cheated on exams. Each time I tried to defend myself, my parents dismissed it as jealousy. Sophie was their golden girl, and I was the shadow. But shadows see what light hides. I noticed how Sophie leaned on our parents for everything, how she never learned to stand on her own feet. I watched her manipulate twist stories charm adults while mistreating peers. I began to sense that her power rested not on real strength, but on the protection of our parents' blind devotion. Still, that knowledge did not lessen the pain. There were nights when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Sophie's laughter drift from the living room where she held court with friends. I wanted to belong, to be loved equally. Instead, I learned endurance. I found small victories in schoolwork, in the quiet praise of teachers who noticed my effort. I dreamed of leaving, of building a life where my worth was not measured against Sophie's reflection. Yet every time I thought I had escaped family obligations dragged me back into the orbit of her cruelty. College gave me temporary freedom. I studied education, determined to work with children so none of them would feel as invisible as I had. Those years away were the first time I tasted independence. But even then, Sophie loomed. She called, constantly demanding favors, asking for money, borrowing my car during holidays. If I refused, she reported to our parents that I was selfish. They echoed her accusation until I relented. It was easier to surrender than to argue against their united front. After graduation, I returned to our hometown to take a teaching job. I rented a small apartment a few blocks from the school, hoping distance would shield me. But the Dawsons' gravitational pull remained strong. Family dinners were mandatory. Sophie, now in her early 30s, had squandered several jobs yet still strutted with entitlement. She hinted at investments at needing my signature for paperwork. Each time I refused, she grew sharper, her insults cutting deeper. My mother urged me to help my sister. My father demanded I remember family loyalty. Their pressure weighed heavy, but I clung to the small independence I had carved out. Beneath the surface, resentment simmered. I knew Sophie envied my stability, however modest. She had the praise of our parents, but none of the discipline to hold a job. I had a steady paycheck and the respect of my students, and that infuriated her. She needed to reassert dominance to remind everyone that in the Dawson household, she remained superior. That context is why the scene at my mother's birthday unfolded the way it did. It was not spontaneous rage. It was years of favoritism crystallizing into violence. Sophie knew she could pull my hair, drag me down the stairs, and our parents would smooth it over with a lie. She trusted that silence would protect her, that my humiliation would be buried beneath forced laughter and cake. She was right that night. No guest dared confront her. No parent raised a hand to stop her. But what she did not know was that in trying to degrade me publicly, she planted the seed of my resistance. Standing in that dining room with my lip bleeding and my hair tangled, I felt every year of dismissal settle into resolve. If my family would not protect me, I would protect myself. If witnesses chose silence, I would gather evidence that could not be ignored. For the first time, I saw clearly that endurance alone would not save me. Action was required. This is the truth of my background. I was raised in a house where love was conditional, where appearances outweighed compassion, where my sister's cruelty was rewarded and my silence expected. That history shaped me, scarred me, but also prepared me. Because once you have endured years in the shadows, the first glimpse of light becomes something you fight for with every ounce of strength. And so, when Sophie dragged me down those stairs, she believed she had humiliated me beyond recovery. She did not realize she had awakened the one thing she feared most, my determination to stand, to gather allies, and to turn her own arrogance into the weapon that would undo her. The night of my mother's birthday should have ended with Sophie's assault on the stairs, but it did not. That spectacle became only the surface of a deeper storm. In the days that followed, Sophie revealed why her fury had reached such a violent pitch. She wanted my signature on a loan document, a mortgage application that would give her control over a property she could never afford on her own. It started quietly. I came home from teaching one afternoon to find Sophie waiting at my door. She leaned against the railing of my apartment building, arms folded, her expression deceptively casual. I felt the old dread rise inside me, but forced my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Just came to talk, little sister." I unlocked the door reluctantly. She followed me inside her heels, clicking against the floor like a countdown. She spread a manila folder across my kitchen table. Inside were neatly typed forms, spaces already filled with my name, my address, even my social security number. My stomach clenched as I recognized the layout of a loan application. Sophie tapped the signature line with a manicured nail. "You just need to sign here," she said, as if it were the most natural request in the world. I pushed the papers back toward her. "I am not signing anything." Her tone sharpened. "It is for the family. Mom and Dad are counting on us." She emphasized us, but I knew she meant me. I shook my head. "I will not put my name on debt I cannot control." Her smile slipped. She leaned forward, voice low. "You will regret saying no." The memory of the birthday assault still burned on my scalp, but this moment carried a different weight. She was no longer content with humiliation. She wanted financial chains. I stood firm. "If you need money, ask the bank on your own." She gathered the papers, roughly, eyes narrowing. "You think you are better than me because you have a job. Do you know how quickly I can ruin you?" Her words hung heavy in the air. Later that evening, she stormed into our parents' house and told them I had betrayed the family. My mother called within the hour, voice sharp. "Why are you being so difficult? Sophie needs this. Your father is worried about appearances." I closed my eyes, listening to her lecture, every sentence an echo of years past. My refusal was painted as selfishness, my caution twisted into betrayal. When I tried to explain that the documents were already filled with my information without consent, she dismissed it. You always exaggerate. The next day at school, I tried to focus on my students, their chatter about science projects, their laughter during recess, but the tension followed me like a shadow. At lunch, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Sophie, 2 voicemails from my father. Each message circled back to the same demand sign, the papers. I deleted them, but my hands shook. That weekend, my mother arranged another family dinner. I considered refusing, but curiosity, maybe even duty, dragged me there. The dining table glittered with china and candles, but the atmosphere was brittle. My father sat at the head, jaw tight. Sophie lounged opposite me, the folder placed deliberately beside her plate. My mother served dishes as though feeding strangers. Halfway through the meal, Sophie shoved the folder toward me again. Just sign it. Everyone is waiting. The room fell silent, forks clinking to a stop. I felt every eye on me. I straightened in my chair. I am not signing. Her face darkened. She rose suddenly, the chair screeching back. She reached across the table, snatching a handful of my hair, yanking hard. Plates rattled, a glass toppled. My cry tore through the air as she dragged me from the chair toward the staircase that led down to the living room. Guests from the birthday had been replaced by family alone, but the violence was no less brutal. My scalp seared as Sophie pulled with both hands, forcing me down step by step. My knees slammed against wood, my elbows scraped. My father barked her name but made no move to intervene. My mother wrung her hands, eyes darting between us, trapped between denial and fear. I reached the bottom step, body bruised, chest heaving. Sophie released me with a shove. Humiliation flared hotter than pain. I scrambled to my feet, glaring at my parents. You let her do this. My father's voice was sharp and patient. Stop causing scenes. My mother whispered, just sign the papers and this will end. My heart cracked at her words. End. As though my silence could solve years of cruelty. I left that night without touching dessert, without saying goodbye. I walked into the cold air, tears streaking my face, resolve hardening with each step. Sophie had escalated from insults to physical assault, from gossip to financial coercion, and my parents had chosen again to protect her. That combination was no longer survivable. At home, I stood before the mirror, touching the raw spots on my scalp, the bruises forming on my arms. I photographed each mark with trembling hands. The phone captured not just evidence, but a decision. This would not be hidden. I would no longer bury the truth under family reputation. The triggering incident was not a single tug of hair or a push down the stairs. It was the realization that my family had no limits, that they would sacrifice me to protect Sophie's image. It was the knowledge that my sister would destroy me financially and physically if I allowed it. That night became the border between endurance and resistance. In the quiet of my apartment, I whispered a vow to myself. No more. I would not sign away my future. I would not endure humiliation in silence. If Sophie wanted war, she had chosen the wrong opponent. Because now I understood that fighting back was not betrayal, it was survival. The bruises on my arms had barely begun to fade when my mother called me early one morning. Her tone was clipped weary, the way she always sounded when she wanted to deliver instructions disguised as concern. Emma, we need to talk, she said. I waited, bracing myself. About what happened the other night, she continued, lowering her voice as though someone might overhear through the phone. You owe Sophie an apology. For a moment, I could not breathe. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, thinking I had misheard. An apology. She attacked me in your dining room, I whispered. My mother sighed. You embarrassed her in front of the family. You provoked her. It is best if you smooth things over. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles whitened. Smooth things over meant erase the truth. Rewrite the scene, blame the victim. Later that day, my father called. His words carried more menace than my mother's pleading tone. Stop this nonsense, Emma. People in town talk. If you keep stirring trouble, we will all look bad. His definition of trouble meant refusing to sign fraudulent documents, refusing to be dragged downstairs without protest. His obsession with appearances had reached the point where my safety was negotiable. Sophie herself was less subtle. She cornered me outside the grocery store, her lips curved in a smirk that made my skin crawl. "You are making a fool of yourself, little sister," she said. "Nobody believes you. They think you are unstable." I tried to walk past her, but she stepped closer, whispering so only I could hear. "You will never win. You are weak. You always have been." The confidence in her voice shook me more than the threat. She believed the narrative our parents had crafted. She believed that silence from others equaled permission to keep hurting me. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table replaying the voices in my head. My mother's demand for an apology, my father's warning about reputation, Sophie's hiss that I was weak, each word layered over the next until I doubted my own memory. Had I exaggerated the violence? Had I made too much of the documents? The bruises on my arms said otherwise. The photos on my phone confirmed the truth. But gaslighting works like water erosion. It carves away certainty until even reality feels uncertain. I forced myself to anchor in the facts. I remembered the pain in my scalp, the sharp slam of stairs against my knees, the copper taste of blood in my mouth. Those were not inventions. They were lived moments recorded in photographs and written in my body. Gaslighting might twist perceptions, but evidence remained firm. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. The following weekend, my parents invited me to Sunday dinner again. Against my better judgment, I went. Part of me hoped they had reconsidered, that they might finally acknowledge the truth. Instead, the evening unfolded like theater. My mother greeted me with a forced smile, Sophie lounging behind her with calculated indifference. My father launched into small talk about local politics, steering conversation away from conflict. But tension simmered beneath every word. Halfway through the meal, my mother placed her hand on mine. "Emma," she said sweetly, "we can put all this behind us. Just admit you overreacted. Tell Sophie you are sorry." I pulled my hand back. "I will not apologize for being attacked." My father slammed his fork down. "Enough. If you insist on this delusion, you will destroy this family." His voice rose, commanding, echoing off the dining room walls. I met his glare with a steadiness I had not felt before. "This family is already broken," I said quietly. Sophie leaned back in her chair, watching the exchange with triumph. To her, my refusal to apologize only confirmed my role as the family scapegoat. She believed I was digging my own grave. Yet beneath her smug expression, I sensed a flicker of unease. Perhaps she recognized that I no longer bent as easily to their narrative. That night, I walked home under the weight of isolation heavier than ever. My parents had chosen denial. My sister had chosen intimidation. And the community around us, those who had witnessed the staircase assault, had chosen silence. The message was clear. If I waited for validation from others, I would wither. The only person who could protect me was myself. Gaslighting is insidious because it corrodes not just trust in others, but trust in oneself. Every cruel remark from Sophie, every dismissive glance from my father, every manipulative sigh from my mother chipped at my certainty. But in that corrosion, something else emerged, a spark of defiance. If they would not name the truth, then I would. If they demanded silence, then I would speak louder. I returned to my apartment and pulled out the folder of photographs I had printed. Images of bruises, strands of torn hair, the loan documents Sophie had shoved at me. I spread them across the table like puzzle pieces, each one a reminder that I was not crazy. I was living through abuse disguised as family loyalty, and I realized then that the cover-up would become my evidence. Every denial, every forced apology, every attempt to erase reality would only strengthen my case. The decision crystallized. I would stop playing their script. I would stop waiting for my parents to see me. I would begin to prepare for the day Sophie's arrogance crossed the line in public again, and when it did, I would be ready with proof. The Monday after that disastrous dinner, I limped into work, exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. My students' cheerful greetings lifted me briefly, but by lunchtime I slumped in the teacher's lounge, staring blankly at my untouched sandwich. That was when Nancy Rodriguez, my colleague and friend, slid into the chair beside me. She was the kind of woman who noticed things others missed. She glanced at my long sleeves, then at the stiffness in my posture. Without asking, she pulled my sleeve back just enough to reveal the faint bruise spreading down my forearm. Her eyes softened, but her voice carried steel. "Emma, that's not an accident. Who did this?" I tried to brush it off to deflect with vague excuses about clumsiness, but she shook her head. "Don't. I've seen too many women pretend they tripped when the truth was uglier. Tell me what happened." The words poured out before I could stop them. I told her about the birthday, the staircase, the loan papers, the second attack at Sunday dinner. I expected her to recoil or to tell me to keep quiet. Instead, she leaned closer. "You know this isn't just family drama, right? This is abuse. And there are laws against it." Her certainty steadied me. For years, I had been conditioned to doubt my own experience. Hearing Nancy name it for what it was felt like a lifeline. She pressed a business card into my hand. "My cousin is a lawyer. His name is David Miller. He lives 2 blocks from you. He's helped women in situations like this. Call him. Please." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the card. Part of me hesitated. Involving outsiders felt like betrayal. But then I remembered Sophie's hiss in my ear. "You will never win." My parents' demands for silence echoed too. The choice crystallized. Staying quiet was surrender. Reaching out was survival. I dialed the number. David answered with a calm, professional tone. When I introduced myself, his voice softened. "Nancy told me you might call. Why don't you come by tomorrow after school? Bring whatever you have." The next day, I walked to his modest brick house, nerves jangling. Inside, shelves of legal books lined the walls and framed certificates hung neatly. He offered coffee, then gestured for me to sit. "Tell me everything he said." I recounted the assaults, the forged documents, the gaslighting. I placed the photos on the table along with the folder of papers Sophie had pushed at me. David studied each one carefully. When I finished, he leaned back, expression grave. "Emma, what you're describing fits multiple categories of domestic abuse. Physical assault, financial coercion, intimidation. You have the right to protection." I swallowed hard. "My parents will deny everything. Sophie will twist the story." He nodded. "Abusers often count on that. But we don't need their approval to act. The law provides options." He explained step by step. "First, file a police incident report. That creates a formal record. Then request an emergency protective order. Judges can issue those within hours. It bars your sister from contact immediately. After that, we can pursue a temporary restraining order which requires a court hearing. At that hearing, you can present evidence and the judge can extend protection for years." I listened each step like a brick forming a wall of safety, but fear still gnawed. "What if they say I'm lying?" David leaned forward. "Evidence speaks louder than rumors. Your photos, your texts, the paperwork with your information, those are powerful. And remember, you are not alone. You have me, you have Nancy. We'll stand with you." Tears welled in my eyes. For so long, I had felt isolated, outnumbered. Now, for the first time, someone stood on my side without condition. I wiped my face, quickly embarrassed, but David's expression held only respect. That night, I called Nancy to thank her. She laughed gently. "You don't need to thank me. Everyone deserves safety, Emma. You've carried this burden alone long enough. Let us help." The following day after school, David accompanied me to the police station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat across from Officer James Martinez, a seasoned man with kind eyes. He listened intently as I recounted the attacks. His pen scratched across the report form, noting each detail. When I slid the photographs across the desk, he studied them, then nodded. "These are clear. Combined with your statement, it's enough to proceed." He explained my rights patiently. "You can request an emergency protective order right now. It will be signed by the duty judge and will take effect immediately. It means your sister cannot come near you, your home, or your workplace. If she violates it, we can arrest her." The words carried weight, a tangible boundary against Sophie's reach. I signed the paperwork with a trembling hand. Officer Martinez assured me a copy would be delivered to Sophie that night. Walking out of the station with David beside me, I felt both shaky and lighter. For years, my family's narrative had trapped me. Now, an official document recognized my reality. It was a small shield, but it was real. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the protective order folded neatly on the table. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Nancy called to check in. "How do you feel?" I exhaled slowly. Like maybe I'm not powerless anymore. The next days passed with tense anticipation. Sophie tried calling, but when I did not answer, she left voicemails dripping with venom. You think a piece of paper can stop me? Wait until Mom and Dad hear about your lies. Each message I saved, labeling them as evidence. Instead of crumbling under her threats, I felt steadier. David's voice echoed in my mind. Evidence speaks louder than rumors. At school, Nancy remained my quiet guardian. She walked with me to my car, checked in during breaks. Knowing she was there reminded me that allies could be found even in unexpected places. I began to see my world differently. Where once I felt surrounded by hostility now, I saw threads of support weaving together. Allies appear in moments when we choose truth over silence. For me, Nancy's sharp eyes, David's steady guidance, and Officer Martinez's official recognition marked the turning point. I was no longer an isolated victim inside a toxic family. I was a woman preparing to fight back with the law, with evidence, with people who believed me. That realization burned bright inside me. For the first time since Sophie had dragged me down those stairs, I felt not just pain, but purpose. And purpose is stronger than fear. The emergency protective order had been served, and though I could not see Sophie's face when she received it, I imagined her seething. The thought both frightened me and strengthened me. Fear reminded me she was still dangerous, but strength came from knowing I was no longer defenseless. Still, I understood one truth clearly. A single protective order might not hold forever. To ensure Sophie faced real consequences, I needed evidence so undeniable that even my parents' denial and her manipulations would collapse under its weight. I started with the physical reminders. Each morning before school, I photographed the bruises, documenting their progress as they shifted from dark purple to yellow and green. I printed the photos with timestamps, placing them into a folder labeled simply Evidence. I included pictures of the strands of hair she had ripped out, kept sealed in a plastic bag. It felt clinical, almost detached, but documenting every wound gave me control. Where humiliation had once silenced me, evidence now gave me voice. Texts became my second weapon. Sophie could not resist sending messages filled with rage. She wrote, "You are tearing this family apart. You are nothing without us." Another read, "That order means nothing. Everyone knows you are unstable." Each time her words buzzed across my phone, my hands trembled, but then I would screenshot, save, and print. Every insult became another stone in the foundation of my case. I knew words and photos were powerful, but audio could capture the venom in her voice. With David's guidance, I purchased a small recorder. One evening, when Sophie showed up outside my apartment despite the order, I pressed record before answering through the locked door. Her voice hissed through the thin wood. "You think the law cares about you. You think anyone will believe you." She banged once, then stormed off. When silence settled again, I replayed the recording, my pulse quickening. That audio would become undeniable proof that she violated the order. David praised my diligence. "Courts respond strongly to consistent documentation," he explained. "Abusers rely on confusion, on making it seem like isolated incidents. By gathering everything, you show a pattern." At his urging, I also began keeping a written journal. Each entry listed the date, time, and description of any interaction, message, or threat. I included even the smallest details, like seeing Sophie's car parked across from the school, or noticing her name pop up in a mutual friend's social media post hinting at me. Every line built a timeline that would expose her campaign of intimidation. Officer Martinez encouraged this strategy as well. When I visited the station to drop off the latest screenshots, he told me plainly, "Courts like patterns. They like dates and times. When we show a judge consistent harassment, they understand it is not exaggeration. It is reality." His words fortified me. Each log entry became an act of resistance. Yet evidence was not only about Sophie's threats. It was also about gathering testimony from those who had seen or heard her actions. Nancy volunteered immediately. She wrote a statement detailing the bruises she had noticed, the fear she had witnessed in my posture the day I confided in her. David assured me her account would matter greatly. Witnesses often tip the scales, he said. I thought about the birthday party. Guests had been there. Neighbors, distant relatives, family, friends. Most had stayed silent, but silence could fracture under legal pressure. David suggested we quietly approach those who might be sympathetic. We began with Mrs. Carlson, a neighbor who had attended. She shifted nervously when I knocked on her door, but when I explained I was seeking only the truth, she admitted she had seen Sophie pull my hair. "I can write it down," she whispered. I just did not want to get caught in family drama. I thanked her, knowing her account could pierce the facade Sophie tried to maintain. Every piece added to the mosaic: bruises, hair, photos, texts, recordings, witness statements, a journal. The more I collected, the more Sophie's power shrank. Still gathering evidence meant enduring her retaliation. Despite the protective order, she circled my life like a predator. Twice I found notes slipped under my apartment door, each scrawled with threats. One read, "You will regret crossing me." The other, "You cannot hide forever." I photographed both, slid them into plastic sleeves, and logged the times. I called Officer Martinez, who arrived promptly, his presence a reminder that I was not invisible. He collected the originals, assuring me they would be entered into the case file. At school, Sophie's whispers slithered through mutual acquaintances. Rumors spread that I was unstable, that I fabricated stories for attention. Some colleagues eyed me with suspicion, but Nancy's unwavering support shielded me. When whispers grew too loud, she stood beside me in the teacher's lounge and declared, "Emma is telling the truth. If you doubt it, ask to see the police report." Her boldness silenced many. That moment taught me another truth: allies amplify evidence. Meanwhile, David combed through the forged documents Sophie had shoved at me. He compared the signatures with genuine ones from my teaching contract and bank records. The differences leapt out pressure, too. Uniform curves too precise, as though traced. He connected me with a forensic document analyst who confirmed the forgery. Another pillar of proof. Late at night, I sometimes lay awake trembling. Fear still lived inside me, whispering that Sophie might escalate, that my parents' scorn would never end. But then I would picture the growing binder on my desk filled with evidence. It reminded me that truth was on my side, not their gaslighting. The more I gathered, the more strategic I became. I started thinking not just as a victim, but as someone building a case. Every decision was deliberate. Answer the door only with recorder running. Keep all communications in writing. Share updates with David and Officer Martinez promptly. Even my journal became meticulous, cross-referencing times with photos. One evening, Nancy invited me over for dinner. Over plates of warm food, she looked me in the eye. "Emma, I know this is exhausting, but what you are doing is brave. Most people crumble under this kind of pressure. You are choosing to fight with intelligence." Her words cracked something in me. I had spent so long seeing myself as weak. For the first time, I considered that maybe resilience was its own strength. That night, as I updated my evidence binder, I wrote a single line on the first page in bold letters. "She cannot erase me." Those words became my mantra. Smart resistance meant more than collecting proof. It meant refusing to play her game of fear. When Sophie tried to provoke me in public, I walked away calmly while recording. When my parents called demanding apologies, I kept my responses brief and factual, no emotion for them to twist. I transformed from their scapegoat into a strategist. As weeks passed, the folder thickened. David scheduled a preliminary meeting with the court to extend the protective order into a temporary restraining order. He explained that our evidence would impress the judge. "Emma, you are not only protecting yourself, you are setting a precedent that abusers cannot hide behind family walls." The thought both frightened and inspired me. Could my fight ripple beyond my own survival? Could it expose Sophie not just to consequences, but also shine light on patterns too many endured silently? On the eve of the hearing, I sat with Nancy, David, and Officer Martinez. We reviewed every page, every photograph, every recording. The weight of the binder felt heavy in my hands, but in that weight I found empowerment. Each page was a step away from victimhood and a step toward justice. Gathering evidence was not glamorous. It was tedious, painful, sometimes terrifying. But it was the smartest resistance I had ever mounted. Where Sophie had fists and fury, I had patient strategy and allies who believed in me. And as the binder closed with a final snap that night, I realized something profound. For years, Sophie had written the story of my life, casting me as weak and disposable. Now, with every documented bruise and recorded threat, I was rewriting that story. The day after David filed the request to extend my protective order into a temporary restraining order, Sophie escalated. I should have expected it. For every step I took toward independence, she responded with twice the venom, desperate to reassert control. But I still wasn't prepared for how quickly the spiral deepened. It started with the bottle. I was leaving my mother's house after dropping off groceries one evening when Sophie appeared from the shadows of the porch. She had a half-empty wine bottle in her hand, her movements loose, her smile sharp. Without warning, she swung the bottle sideways into my shoulder. The impact sent a shockwave through my arm, and I stumbled back, gasping at the sharp pain radiating down to my elbow. The bottle clattered to the pavement and shattered glass scattering across the driveway. My mother burst through the door, but instead of rushing to help me, she snapped, "Stop making a scene, Emma! You'll wake the neighbors!" My father appeared behind her, silent arms crossed like a judge, ready to hand down a sentence. Sophie just smirked. "See what happens when you don't cooperate." I cradled my shoulder, fighting back tears of pain and fury. My parents' refusal to acknowledge reality cut deeper than the strike. I backed away, climbed into my car, and drove off before Sophie could follow. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but I forced myself to pull over long enough to snap photos of the bruises forming, then recorded a voice memo describing the incident. Smart resistance. Documentation. Proof. The next morning, I emailed everything to David and texted Martinez. His reply came within minutes. "We'll add this as evidence of violation. Stay alert." That reassurance steadied me, but fear still churned. Sophie had crossed another line. At school, the attack bruises throbbed beneath my sleeve. Nancy noticed immediately, her jaw tightening. "Emma, this is getting dangerous. We need to make sure the order is enforced." I nodded, but dread weighed heavy. Enforcement required courage, and each act of escalation tested how much I had left. Sophie, however, wasn't content with physical blows. She shifted to attacking my reputation. Within days, whispers spread among colleagues. Someone claimed I was mentally unstable, that I fabricated stories for attention. I recognized Sophie's fingerprints immediately. She had always wielded gossip as a weapon, but now with legal action looming, she sharpened her lies. One afternoon, the school principal called me into his office. He looked uneasy, shuffling papers. "We've received some concerning anonymous messages, Emma. Allegations about your mental health. We're required to look into them." My stomach sank. "May I see them?" He slid the printouts across the desk. Phrases leapt out unstable, unfit to teach, prone to delusions. I clenched my fists, fury battling humiliation. I pulled a folder from my bag. "These are police reports, protective orders, and evidence collected with my attorney. The allegations you received are retaliation from my abuser." The principal scanned the documents, his frown deepening. "I'll forward this to HR. Thank you for being transparent." His voice softened. "And Emma, I believe you." Relief flooded me, though the sting of Sophie's attempt lingered. She wanted to strip me of livelihood as well as dignity. David reminded me to keep perspective. "Smear campaigns are common," he said. "They hope to isolate you, but every false claim creates more evidence of harassment. Keep saving everything." I did. Each rumor became another line in my growing log. Meanwhile, Sophie's direct threats continued. Twice, I found notes taped to my apartment door. One read, "If you keep this up, you'll regret it." The other, "You belong to us." Both scrawled in her rushed handwriting. I photographed them, sealed them in plastic, and called Martinez again. He came by personally collecting the originals. "This is classic intimidation," he confirmed. "We'll submit these as well." But the most chilling moment came late one evening as I left the school building after grading papers. The parking lot was nearly empty, the air crisp with autumn chill. As I approached my car, headlights flared across the lot. Sophie's vehicle idled at the far end. She sat behind the wheel engine, rumbling eyes locked on me. I froze. She didn't move closer, didn't roll down the window, just stared. After a long minute, she sped away, tires screeching. My pulse pounded. I sat in my car, trembling, forcing myself to jot down the time, location, and description. Another entry for the log, another violation. When I relayed the incident to David, he pressed his palms together. This pattern is exactly what judges look for. Escalation intimidation. Disregard for orders. It strengthens your case. His calm steadied me, though dread still coiled in my stomach. Living under constant threat was exhausting. Despite the fear, moments of strength emerged. Nancy continued to walk with me to my car after school, her presence a quiet shield. Officer Martinez checked in regularly, reminding me I wasn't alone. And David prepared meticulously for the upcoming hearing, compiling every shred of evidence into a binder thicker than a textbook. Each page felt like a brick building a fortress around me. Still, Sophie grew desperate. She called my phone repeatedly from blocked numbers, leaving voicemails laced with venom. One hissed, "The judge won't save you." Another sneered, "You're nothing without us." I saved each one, forwarded them to David, and logged them. Fear flickered, but a strange empowerment followed. Every threat became a tool against her. My parents, true to form, continued their chorus of denial. My mother phoned me late one night. "Emma, can't you see what you're doing to your sister? She's under stress. She needs you." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "Mom, she attacked me. She forged documents. She's stalking me." My mother's voice hardened. "Don't exaggerate. Just drop the case before you destroy this family." The call ended with silence heavier than words. I logged it too, a record of their complicity. The escalation reached its breaking point the week before the hearing. I returned home from work to find my car vandalized. Tires slashed, windshield cracked a single note under the wiper. "Stay silent or else." My knees buckled. Tears stung my eyes as I called Martinez. He arrived quickly, photographing the damage bagging the note. "This is felony vandalism," he said. "Combined with the order violations, it paints a very clear picture." His certainty steadied me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, binder open before me. Photos of bruises, screenshots of texts, audio recordings, notes, voicemails, vandalism. It was all there, meticulously documented. I realized then that Sophie, in her desperation to silence me, had provided the strongest case against herself. Every act of escalation, every threat, every smear became another nail in the coffin of her credibility. Yet the emotional toll was undeniable. Nights were restless, filled with dreams of being dragged downstairs again. Days were tense, every shadow a reminder she lurked nearby. But each time I faltered, I repeated the mantra I had written in bold on the first page of the binder. She cannot erase me. By the time the hearing date arrived, fear still clung to me, but beneath it burned resolve. Sophie had escalated with violence, intimidation, and lies, but I had answered with patience, documentation, and allies. And I knew that in the quiet order of the courtroom, her chaos would finally meet consequence. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to mirror my nerves. I dressed carefully, choosing a modest navy dress and a blazer clothing that spoke of professionalism rather than drama. I wanted the judge to see me as steady, not vengeful. In my bag, I carried the thick binder David and I had assembled: photos, statements, recordings, printouts. The weight of it tugged on my shoulder, but in that heaviness, I felt security. Each page inside was truth no one could erase. David met me outside the courthouse steps. He wore a crisp suit, his expression calm, reassuring. "You're ready, Emma," he said. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Together we climbed the stone steps, every echo of our shoes sounding like a drumbeat. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled faintly of polish and old paper. Wooden pews lined either side, filled with people waiting for their cases. At the front sat Judge Karen Whitmore, a woman in her mid-50s with steady eyes that missed nothing. She adjusted her glasses, her gavel resting lightly beside her. I had researched her reputation firm, fair, intolerant of intimidation. Knowing she would preside gave me courage. Sophie entered with our parents trailing behind her. She looked smug, dressed in a sleek blazer that seemed borrowed rather than owned. Her eyes found mine instantly narrowing with contempt. My mother gave me a tight smile that wasn't encouragement, but warning. My father avoided eye contact, jaw clenched as though carved from stone. Their presence stung, but David's hand on my shoulder reminded me I wasn't alone. The clerk called our case. We rose, stepping forward to the tables before the bench. Judge Whitmore looked at me first. Ms. Dawson, you're requesting a temporary restraining order to extend the protective measures already in place. Do you have evidence to present? David spoke smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. We have photographic documentation, medical reports, witness statements, digital evidence of threats, and proof of order violations. He gestured to the binder. The judge nodded. We'll begin with your testimony. My heart thudded. I rose, palms damp, and faced the courtroom. I told the story from the beginning, the birthday assault, the staircase, the loan documents, the bruises, the wine bottle, the threats. My voice wavered at moments, but I forced it steady, each sentence anchored by memory. David displayed the photographs on a screen for the judge. Bruises, purple and yellow strands of torn hair, the slashed tires. The room was silent except for my words. When I finished, Judge Whitmore inclined her head. Thank you, Ms. Dawson. She turned to Sophie. You may respond. Sophie stood, confidence radiating. She laughed lightly, a sound that grated. Your Honor, my sister is exaggerating. She's always been dramatic, always seeking attention. These bruises. She bruises easily. Those messages, out of context. This is nothing more than a family misunderstanding being blown into scandal. Her words might have sounded convincing if not for the binder waiting. David rose. With the court's permission, we'd like to play an audio recording. Judge Whitmore nodded. The clip filled the courtroom, Sophie's voice hissing through my apartment door. You think the law cares about you? You think anyone will believe you? A slam, then footsteps retreating. The silence afterward was louder than the recording itself. Sophie paled, fumbling with her papers. Next, David projected screenshots of texts. The words glared in bold font. You are nothing without us. You'll regret this. Sophie muttered, They're fake. David calmly produced the phone records verifying the messages originated from her number. Then Nancy was called as a witness. She walked confidently to the stand, swore the oath, and faced the judge. I've seen Emma's injuries. I heard her describe what happened the night her sister dragged her down the stairs. I urged her to seek help because it was clear she was being abused. Her voice rang with certainty. Sophie glared daggers, but Nancy never flinched. Mrs. Carlson, the neighbor, testified next. She admitted seeing Sophie yank my hair at the birthday party. Her hands trembled, but her words were firm. It wasn't play. It was violent. The room shifted. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Finally, Officer Martinez took the stand. He outlined the protective order, the violations, the collected notes and voicemails. His professional tone left no room for doubt. This was not family drama. This was a pattern of intimidation. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Ms. Dawson, do you have anything else to say? Sophie's mask cracked. She slammed her palm against the table. This is ridiculous. She's making me look like a monster. I've carried this family. I won't let her ruin me. Her voice rose, echoing across the chamber. You'll pay for this, Emma. Gasps filled the courtroom. Judge Whitmore's gavel struck sharply. Order. The outburst is on record. She fixed Sophie with a glare that could cut steel. Threatening your sister in my courtroom is contempt. Sit down. Sophie faltered, collapsing into her chair, her bravado crumbling. In that moment, the power shifted. For years, Sophie had controlled the narrative. Now, in front of a judge, witnesses, and our parents, she revealed herself. The courtroom had seen her rage, heard her threats, weighed the evidence. The silence that followed felt different, not complicit this time, acknowledging. Judge Whitmore cleared her throat. Based on the evidence presented, photographic proof, audio, and digital threats, witness testimony, and observed violations, I am granting a 3-year protective order. Ms. Sophie Dawson is prohibited from contacting or approaching Emma Dawson within 500 feet. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. Additionally, this court refers the matter to the district attorney for potential charges of domestic assault, harassment, and intimidation. My breath caught. Relief washed through me, mingled with the sting of tears. David squeezed my arm. You did it! Sophie shot to her feet, sputtering. This isn't fair. She's lying. But her words lacked force now. Even my mother's expression faltered, eyes darting from Sophie to the judge. My father's jaw slackened, his carefully built wall of denial cracking. Judge Whitmore struck the gavel again. Case closed. She glanced at me briefly, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Courage in the courtroom matters, Ms. Dawson. Remember that. As we left the courtroom, the weight of years lifted slightly. The hallway buzzed with conversations, but in my ears, only one truth echoed. For the first time, Sophie had faced consequences she couldn't manipulate away. That public confrontation was more than a legal hearing. It was the unveiling of truth. In front of a judge, in front of witnesses, Sophie's cruelty was laid bare. My family's gaslighting collapsed under the weight of evidence, and I understood then that justice wasn't just about protection. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my life. When the gavel struck and Judge Whitmore announced her decision, it felt like air finally returned to my lungs. For the first time in years, the truth had not only been heard, but recorded as law. Sophie's expression twisted with disbelief, as though the world had betrayed her by refusing to accept her version. My mother clutched her purse tightly, her face pale, while my father looked down at the polished courtroom floor, unable to meet my eyes. The protective order was clear. Sophie was barred from contacting me, barred from approaching my home workplace, or even Nancy's house where she had once lingered. If she tried, she would be arrested immediately. More than that, the district attorney's office had received a full packet of evidence. Charges of domestic assault and intimidation were now on their desk. The law would no longer shrug at her behavior. That evening, the news spread quickly in town. Word traveled through whispers at the grocery store, murmurs at the diner. For years, Sophie had strutted around as the favored daughter, untouchable, protected by my parents' denial. Now her name was whispered with suspicion. People began to see what had always been there. At school, colleagues who had once eyed me warily approached with quiet words. I heard what happened, Emma. You were brave. One teacher admitted she had doubted me before, but now understood. Evidence silenced rumors in a way words alone never could. Even parents of my students sent supportive notes assuring me that standing up for myself set a powerful example. Sophie's anger, however, did not cool. Though barred from direct contact, she tried indirect means. A cousin messaged me suddenly after years of silence, urging me to drop the case for the family's sake. I recognized Sophie's hand behind it. I forwarded the message to David, who advised me to ignore and document. Each attempt at intimidation now worked against her. The larger consequence unfolded at home. My parents could no longer maintain their wall of denial. Neighbors had read witness statements in the local paper, a short article summarizing the hearing. Margaret could not smile it away. Richard could not dismiss it as exaggeration. At church, whispers followed them questions they could not answer. Reputation, the thing my father prized most, cracked and fell around him. I visited their house only once after the hearing, dropping off documents related to property Sophie had tried to claim. The air was heavy. My mother's eyes ringed with exhaustion. She whispered, I never thought it would come to this. I looked at her steadily. It came to this because you chose silence. She flinched but said nothing more. For once, my father remained quiet too, his authority muted. Meanwhile, the legal wheels turned. Officer Martinez called to confirm Sophie had been formally charged with misdemeanor domestic assault and felony intimidation. The words carried weight. No longer was she merely my tormentor. She was now a defendant in the eyes of the state. Her smirk could not erase a criminal docket number. David explained the process hearing's possible plea deal's sentencing. Whether Sophie accepted responsibility or not, the record would follow her. Jobs, housing, credit, every avenue she had once used to manipulate now became narrower. Actions have consequences, he said simply, and she is finally facing hers. The community's response added another layer. Parents who once praised Sophie's charm began to avoid her in public. Invitations dwindled. The golden image Margaret had polished for decades dulled overnight. For years, I had carried the shame of being the lesser daughter. Now the shame settled on those who had enabled cruelty. Yet the greatest consequence was internal. I no longer felt the constant tremor of helplessness. Walking to my car after school, I no longer scanned the lot with dread. Sleeping at night, I no longer jumped at every sound. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the law stood with me. Sophie could not simply erase my reality with whispers and smirks. The courtroom had stripped her of that power. For Sophie, the fall was steep. She called Nancy once in violation of the order, demanding she convince me to drop the charges. Nancy recorded the voicemail, and Martinez responded within hours. Sophie spent a night in custody before posting bail. Word spread further now she was not only charged, but arrested. The myth of her invincibility shattered. My father's obsession with reputation turned inward. He began avoiding public places, declining social events. My mother grew quiet, her face etched with worry lines. They had built their lives on image, but image had crumbled. And in that rubble, I found a strange clarity. Their choices had consequences too. By protecting Sophie, they had destroyed their own standing. The protective order gave me space to rebuild. I started attending support groups for survivors of family violence. Listening to others' stories reminded me I was not alone, that many carried scars from those meant to protect them. Speaking aloud my own experiences in those circles felt healing, as though every bruise recorded in my binder had finally served its purpose. Sophie faced the community she once ruled with arrogance now with suspicion and disdain. Where she had wielded control, she now faced whispers of accountability. The woman who had dragged me by the hair, who had hissed threats through doors, was now reduced to explaining herself to lawyers and judges. That was the consequence she never imagined. She thought family silence would always protect her. She thought appearances would always shield her, but truth once spoken and documented carried farther. It spread into courtrooms, into community whispers, into the very reputation she had relied on. For me, consequence meant freedom. Freedom to walk into school with my head high. Freedom to visit the grocery store without fearing her shadow. Freedom to imagine a future not dictated by Sophie's rage or my parents' silence. And as Judge Whitmore had said, courage in the courtroom mattered because it transformed whispers of doubt into records of fact. It turned fear into consequence. And it reminded me that while justice cannot erase scars, it can prevent new ones. The weeks after the courtroom hearing felt strangely quiet. For so long, my life had been dominated by Sophie's eruptions, my parents' pressure, and my own fear. Now the silence was unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable at first. But in that silence, I began to rebuild. I moved out of my small apartment into a brighter place across town. The protective order gave me confidence to live without looking over my shoulder every time I parked. I chose a second-floor unit with sunlight streaming through wide windows, a space that felt open rather than trapped. On the first night in my new home, I set my binder of evidence on a shelf, not as a burden anymore, but as a monument to survival. Teaching became my anchor. My students didn't know the details of my struggle, but they sensed the shift. I smiled more easily, carried myself with steadier confidence. One afternoon, a student asked Ms. Dawson, "How come you always remember everyone's birthdays?" I answered honestly, "Because being seen matters." Their little faces lit up, and I realized how deeply I wanted to give them the recognition I had long craved from my own family. Nancy remained at my side, not just as a colleague, but as a true friend. We shared dinners, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. One evening, she told me, "Emma, you turned pain into purpose." That's rare. I knew she was right. Without her sharp eyes noticing my bruises that day, I might never have taken the first step toward justice. David continued to support me, guiding me through the remaining legal processes. The district attorney pursued Sophie's case with determination thanks to the evidence binder and her courtroom outburst. When plea negotiations began, David called to explain. "She'll likely face probation fines and mandatory counseling, but the conviction will follow her. She'll never erase this record." The relief in his voice mirrored mine. Consequences had become real, permanent. Officer Martinez checked in occasionally, updating me on Sophie's compliance with the protective order. "She's keeping her distance now," he reported. Knowing the law was watching over me allowed me to finally breathe deeply. The nights of jumpings at every creak in the floor began to fade. Sleep, once restless and fractured, grew steady again. Yet the journey wasn't only legal. Healing meant confronting the emotional wreckage left by years of neglect and cruelty. I joined a support group for survivors of family violence. Sitting in a circle of strangers who somehow felt like kin, I listened to stories that mirrored mine in unexpected ways. Each voice carried pain, but also resilience. When it was my turn to speak, words trembled out, but the nods around the circle reassured me. Sharing my story didn't diminish me, it connected me. Margaret, my mother, surprised me one afternoon by knocking on my new apartment door. She looked smaller somehow, shoulders slumped under years of denial. She held no papers, no demands, only weary eyes. "Emma," she whispered, "I don't know how to make this right, but I'm sorry." For a moment, anger flared, but beneath it, I saw fear. Fear of losing me forever. Fear of facing what she had allowed. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I let her sit with me. For the first time in years, we talked without Sophie dominating the conversation. Healing meant boundaries, but it also meant recognizing attempts, however imperfect, to change. Richard, my father, never apologized directly. His pride remained a fortress. But I heard from neighbors that he had begun to avoid public gatherings, ashamed of the whispers that followed. That was consequence enough. I no longer sought validation from him. My worth no longer depended on his approval. Judge Whitmore sent a letter after the case closed, handwritten on simple stationery. "Your courage gives others strength. Never doubt that your stand made a difference beyond your own life." I read it twice, tears sliding silently down my face. Validation from the law. From someone who had witnessed my testimony, and Sophie's fury carried more weight than years of silence from my parents. In time, I began to use my experience to help others. With Nancy's encouragement, I started volunteering at a local shelter for women escaping domestic abuse. I helped them with paperwork, guided them on how to document evidence, even shared the mantra I had once scrawled in my binder. "She cannot erase me." Watching survivors take those words as their own gave me purpose. The protective order remained my shield, but healing meant I no longer clung to it out of fear. Instead, it became part of a larger story, one where I chose myself, chose truth, and chose to stand when silence was expected. Sophie's shadow still lingered in the town, but it no longer consumed me. Her attempts to smear me had collapsed. Her legal record spoke louder than any rumor. Closure didn't mean forgetting. My scalp still tingled when I brushed my hair, a reminder of the staircase assault. My shoulder ached on rainy days where the wine bottle had struck, but those pains became markers of endurance proof that I had survived. On a spring morning a year after the hearing, I stood at the front of my classroom watching my students rehearse a play. Their laughter filled the room, light spilling through the windows. I thought of how far I had come from the girl dragged downstairs in silence to the woman standing tall, surrounded by voices of the next generation. After class, Nancy slipped me a note with a smile. "Staff meeting today," it read, "but don't worry, it's a celebration. You'll see." That afternoon, the principal announced I was being honored with a community service award for my volunteer work. The room erupted in applause. For once, I didn't shrink or dismiss it. I stood, accepted the certificate, and smiled. Recognition not because of Sophie, not despite her, but because of who I was. Healing and closure meant rewriting my story. Sophie had once declared I would never win, that I was weak. The truth was the opposite. Strength wasn't measured in cruelty or dominance. It was measured in resilience, in choosing to stand and refusing to be erased. That night, as I placed the award on my shelf beside the binder of evidence, I realized both belonged together. One represented the pain I endured, the other the growth that followed. Together, they told the full story of survival, justice, and healing. The journey had not been easy, and scars remained, but I had become something Sophie never imagined: free. And freedom, once claimed, cannot be dragged down any stairs. Have you ever had to stand up to someone in your own family to protect yourself? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey of truth and justice.